Good morning, everybody. My name is Michelle Thornton, and I am pleased to see you all here. If this is your second session of the day, welcome back. If you are, or I guess possibly even third for some folks, if you guys are really committed to winter breakouts. If you're just joining us today for the first time, welcome. It is our third day of the 10-day accessibility challenge, and this is one of over 20 sessions on accessibility. Today's topic, we've been talking a lot about the idea of structured content and how to make our digital Word documents, web content, emails more accessible to all different types of people, and to make sure that we are creating inclusive content for everybody that we're working with. So I'm excited today because we have got a student joining us. Josh, if you want to say hello. Josh Payne is a sophomore on campus, and he's going to be
Hello, everybody. My name is Josh Payne. I'm a sophomore. My major is health and wellness, and I have a minor in nutrition and soon to be business.
I was recruiting him over the last couple of conversations that we've had. Thanks for the shout out, Josh. Our game plan today is I'm going to start by just setting the stage and making sure that we're all clear on some of the terms that we're going to be using. And then we're really going to spend some time with Josh, and I encourage you at that point to put your Zoom in speaker view. Right now, I'm going to be sharing slides, so it's going to automatically go to that. But once I'm done with that, then we'll come back and be able to have that conversation with Josh. After that, then my game plan is to, we'll be doing a quick demo of a specific type of assistive technology called JAWS, using both accessible and inaccessible content, and we can kind of get a sense of what that looks like. And then we'll certainly have some time for questions and answers. But again, thank you all for being here, especially thank you to Josh. We are happy to have you. And with that, we're going to get started. So I am going to share my screen. All right. And hopefully, if I can get kind of a thumbs up from everybody, are you able to hopefully here in a moment see my slides? Yes? Are we good? All right. Awesome. So I talked you through our agenda, but essentially, I want to give us like some motivation about why we're talking about this. Obviously, I think we've got all different kinds of people in the room today, whether you are faculty or staff, other students. I think it's important that we understand that the reason that we are so committed to accessibility is because students with disabilities, or some of the types of challenges that we're going to be talking about today, are a vulnerable population within higher education. Also, I think that the magnitude of the concern may be broader than some of you expect. The statistics vary depending on which population that we're talking about. This was from a few years ago, that right around 20% of undergraduate students have reported having some type of disability. But the reality is that the percentage is likely a lot higher than that, because many people choose not to disclose their disability to broadly or specifically to their institutions. You may have heard me talking about another statistic, which is 1 in 4 of all adults in the United States have some type of disability. Whether it's 20% or 25%, the reality is that we're talking about a large proportion of our population that we serve. And when we think about disabilities, I really encourage you to make sure that you're not solely focused on those types of disabilities that are readily able for you to observe. There are certainly disabilities that are quite obvious to somebody passing you by on the street, things like folks that have a visual impairment or are in a wheelchair, but there are plenty of disabilities that are not particularly visible to the general public, things like physical, cognitive, emotional, or learning disabilities, which definitely still plays into those percentages that we're talking about. And I think that that's why this is much more widespread than what we would anticipate. But let's talk about why that makes them vulnerable, specifically in the setting of higher ed. Number one, we know that they are experiencing barriers that other students are not. And it's often due to that fact that some of those disabilities are not visible, therefore not stated, and those needs are not met. As a result of that, dropout rates are higher, and graduation rates are significantly lower for students with disabilities than those that are not disabled. And this has been nothing but exacerbated during the move to remote instruction under COVID. That has definitely kind of shown a bright light on where some of these disparities lie and how the challenges get even worse in a remote learning environment that's not prepared for a variety of different learning types. So this comes from a survey of that was published in an online blog called EduCause about some of the barriers that students experience. And I think that Josh will be able to weigh in on a more personal level at Oswego here in a moment. But I wanted to just kind of set the stage so that we can understand the types of barriers that students with disabilities encounter. First, although we know that there are all kinds of efforts and initiatives made to provide accommodations and provide resources for students with disabilities, the reality is that often that process of getting those accommodations is extremely cumbersome. And in some institutions, very limited what's available. I like a few of these quotes. I'm not going to read these specifically. You guys can do that on your own. But the reality is that it's not something that is simple. Often there's a lot of paperwork, documentation. It takes a long time. So students have to be extraordinarily proactive in getting that handled ahead of classes. And even in some cases, it still takes time to get that approved. There's also the reality that I think sometimes those accommodations conflict with classroom policies, and then that creates, at a minimum, an awkward situation, at a maximum, a really tough challenge to try and help the instructor understand where those needs lie. Unfortunately, there's a big bucket of things I think that students run into that are related to issues with instructors. Whether that is the student feeling like they need to take on the role of educating their professors to build awareness about what's going on with the student's disability or the instructor's responsibilities under the ADA or accommodations, putting the student in that position of kind of being the educator in that role. Certainly probably doesn't sit well if we think about some of those power dynamics and how that goes for our students. This second one just really, when I read it, I was like, oh God, please, I'm thinking back to all of my years teaching, hoping I didn't do anything like this, right? Every semester, I'm singled out to come talk to an instructor about accommodations in front of other students. So, right, one thing for us to stand up in front of the classroom and say, like, hey, if anybody needs any, thing, or having a statement in our syllabus. It's another thing that, like, Joe Smith, I got an email about your accommodations. Please make sure that we talk after class, right? That lack of discretion, that was just, that was painful to read. And then all the way down to refusing accommodations. And I am going to put good faith in everybody on this call that that's not where we're at. But I think less likely than refusing, it's much more likely for us to be unsure of how best to meet those accommodations, and kind of recognizing that those challenges there as well. I think this last piece really kind of gets at our topic for today, and that's this idea that even in circumstances where we might be working with students to try and meet those accommodations, that if we're not aware and we don't understand kind of what the implications are of not meeting them, sometimes we could maybe inadvertently not do a great job. This comment here talks about the use of captioning for whether it's, for lectures that were pre-recorded or probably even, synchronous Zoom meetings, things like that. In this particular situation, after, kind of taking some time to get those captions available, what the student found was that there were all kinds of errors and mistakes in the captioning, which is what happens when you don't go back and when you just use some sort of an automated tool to caption and you don't check the work on it. So it's kind of like the idea that there was maybe the intention there, but it wasn't necessarily followed through in such a way to make that content fully available and accessible to the student in the same way that everybody else gets it. So I've kind of scratched the surface a little bit on this idea of assistive technology and what students might be with disabilities might be using. So I want to kind of ground that a little bit more specifically. And basically, it's any type of technology or tool that individuals use to either improve or maintain their ability to perform functions or accomplish tasks that might otherwise be really hard or even impossible for them to do. Okay, and so that can, if we could think about assistive technology in a really concrete way, that somebody might have a wheelchair, a cane or walker, some sort of a large print textbook. But we also think about it, and we're going to be talking today a lot about the idea of screen readers and things like voice recognition software. Many of us, whether we have a disability or not, may rely on a lot of these tools for all kinds of different reasons. I think about the people that use Alexa technology or Siri on their phone. This is where you are speaking something to command your phone or other type of technology to do something. That's kind of came out of these voice to text recognition things. Many people turn on captions on videos that they're watching, or foreign language films, any number of other things that kind of has that ability to turn audio into text so that you can look at that in another way. So these types of things are used by all of us, and really, I think it's important for us to recognize that as a community, as a culture here on campus, we can improve the effectiveness of those pieces. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share here for a moment. And again, I encourage everybody to kind of put their view into speaker if you're in speaker view, if you're not there already. And if folks could keep themselves on mute other than myself and Josh, we're going to kind of talk through some of the things that Josh has shared with me. And he's already told us a little bit about who he is and the fact that he's a sophomore. But Josh, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about why you're connected with accessibility resources on campus.
Of course, yeah. So, I have a bunch of different things that would keep me connected. One being diabetes, which is more, that's more like in class, like when we had classes in person. Whereas if I needed to eat during class, or if I needed to like step out and like go check my blood sugar or something, um, that was more prevalent then than it is obviously now. Because now if I need any of that, I could just turn around and do that. Some other things is I have ADHD, which kind of obviously most people know it as. It's kind of just hard to focus and all that stuff. And on top of that, I have like a cognitive processing disorder, which makes it hard for me to like read and write certain things. So those are the ways that I am connected with the accessibility office.
Great. Thank you so much for helping us understand that. I think it's a good chance that there's some people that have not heard of different types of cognitive processing disorders. So I think as we talk through some examples, it'll become clear about how that plays out for you on campus. Can you tell us, before we talk about kind of, just your more general things, can you tell us that once you got connected with accessibility resources, what types of accommodations were you approved for?
Yeah, so obviously the standard I feel like is usually extra time. I have double time. Um, some of the other things is I have a reader to help me on certain tests or even like in class assignments. I have the ability to use my laptop and like do online stuff like, or I guess in paper or paper stuff online. It makes it easier for me to like read and write it. And then also I have the ability to like leave the classroom if I need to, either for diabetes, need to go check myself or treat myself, or whether it's I just need like a minute to go refocus. So, which again is obviously more prevalent in class or in-person classes.
Right, right. And you heard me talk a little bit about some other students' experiences of having to discuss those accommodations with professors. Can you talk? Have you run into anything like that where you've had some challenges around having to disclose or work with professors to get those accommodations met?
Yeah, most of the time it's really good. Like, and I'm thankful to everybody. Like most of the teachers that I've had for that. I would say a few times teachers would give pushback, whether it was like having my laptop being able to be open, like I know they had said in one of the slides that you had, or whether it be like for extra time, or especially one example I would use is the reader. Like teachers would assume like that if I was taking the test, I could take the test in the classroom and I wouldn't need the reader since they would just give me the extra time. So then explaining and trying to like like tell them, oh, but I need to be at the accessibility office so they have the reader set up for me, was sometimes a struggle. I would say the other thing that really touched me when we were looking at the slides was like the discretion part of it.
Mm.
Um, Not naming any names, but one specific teacher one time was like, it was like the beginning of the semester. She was taking giving out a test. She's like, "Oh, Josh, you can't read. Do you need me to read it to you?" In the
Oh,
middle of class, and I'm like, like just try to laugh it off, but at the same time, it's a very awkward conversation. So I would say that part definitely touched me.
I'm really sorry to hear that that happened to you, Josh. That really is got to be so frustrating, but also really, I think, challenging to have that exposed to all of your classmates, particularly when the way that that was said sounds kind of insensitive and not necessarily doesn't really fully describe what's going on with you. Um, so I think there's some things here related to kind of what's going on to this move to the virtual environment, but I want to stop for a minute before we get there because you described a few things that are kind of similar to this about that when we last talked. But let's stop and specifically I want to talk about your use of the reader that you use. Can you remind me in the group here of what reader you use specifically?
So yeah, so I have a MacBook here. So I'm just using like it's called Mac Reader. It's nothing fancy. Obviously, when I was like first semester, I was using whatever they had at the accessibility office, and they gave me a flash drive that had like ebooks, so I could like use the reader on those, as well as having the physical books, which now with COVID, most teachers in most classes have the choice for the electronic books anyways.
Okay, great. And so in the case of, reading material, I think like you said with an ebook, most of us probably get how that works. That would be, the text that you're using for class. But what beyond just reading materials itself, what else do you use the reader for?
Yeah, so I use the reader for a lot. I use the reader like since it I was kind of explaining yesterday how like the processing thing is kind of broken down into two parts. It's hard for me to actually read the text, and then it's hard for me to like actually like figure out what the text is saying. So I use the reader to try to eliminate the like reading aspect of it, so I only have to work and like focus on like processing what it's saying. So I'll use it for anything like questions, any homework that has like any like short answers or anything like that. I'll use it on pretty much any written assignment.
Okay. Do you use it for emails?
I do for lengthier emails. I'll use it. I can use it on anything that I can pull, anything that I can pull up on my laptop. I'm able to use it for.
Great. Okay, thanks. And so are there ever times when the reader gets stuck or it isn't helpful? I have to imagine with something like an ebook or an audiobook, those are probably set up pretty efficiently. But are there times for other materials that the reader just doesn't seem to do a good job for you?
Definitely. For the most part, I would say it's pretty good. But I know we were discussing yesterday. One of the biggest flaws it has is like on those questions, like especially on tests when it's questions that are like, who was the first president? Like, and then it has like a bunch of dashes, and then like it has a few texts afterwards. I don't know what it is, but like the dashes like totally messes up the entire system, and it just stops talking for like a minute or two straight and then continues on, which like if I'm trying to process what it's saying, to have that huge gap right in the middle makes it harder for me to remember what it had just said previously.
Yeah, that's such a great example. So I think we can all, let me just stop here for a moment. All of us in the room, if we, kind of write a test with a fill in the blank or some sort of a question where we kind of use those underlines, that that's the kind of thing that essentially is creating this glitch that we're talking about. Um, so let's talk a little bit then. So there's a question in the chat
Can I
box.
interrupt in a minute? I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
just so the underscore is a bad idea for a screen reader. Is there in the literature a workaround for that if you're asking a fill in the blank question?
so
Um,
yeah, Liz, when Josh told me about this one yesterday, this was the first time I had heard this one, and like
Too.
such a like it was that light bulb moment where I was like, holy cow.
I know.
Yeah, so I do not know the workaround. I don't know, Josh, if there's a way to like when you're using the screen reader to skip or anything like that. But I am on the task, Liz, of trying to sort out what the sort of best practice is in that case, because I honestly don't know.
And I would say that's the best answer that I could provide too. I'm not 100% sure on what the workaround would be, but obviously I would look into it too to see what works best.
Yeah. We're gonna set the accessibility fellows after this one, Liz. We'll figure out what we'll do another follow up on best practices for online tests for screen readers. So we have a question, Josh, in the chat box, just asking if you can use the reader for PDF documents.
Yeah, so what I can do is, I know specifically, I'm not sure how they do it at the accessibility office, but for on mine, as long as the PDF is like, even if it's handwritten neatly, I can literally like screen the whole thing and then it will read it all to me.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about kind of the move to the virtual environment and during COVID. Can you talk? We'll come back to. You gave a great example about using the screen reader in that situation, but just before we get there, just in general, how has your experience changed since we've kind of moved into this more remote environment, given your situation?
Yeah, so obviously, like for every other student, it's been like a drastic change, like every student, every teacher, I should say, like learning this new technology and stuff. I would say specifically the hardest challenge for me would be like, especially on the classes I had out of my 5 classes last semester, only one of them met like, I didn't have any in person, but one of them met on Zoom and stuff. And the other 4 were like giving you assignments that were due at a certain time and you just had to fill them out. I feel like for me and like with like ADHD, like trying to like manage all that and like figure out when to do what was really hard. So I would always end up like doing all my assignments like either the day before or like when you got the notification, oh yeah, don't forget it's due tomorrow, instead of like being able to focus and like figure it out, plan it out. So just that adjustment in itself is hard, on top of just everything being on the computer and like being in my own room where obviously I have more distractions than if I was in a classroom.
Right. What about, so you shared with me something specifically about remote proctoring with exams where you had, you were expected to be on your video. And can you just explain that, kind of what happened in that situation?
Yeah, so going back to the reader, since the reader has to take everything and scan it, when I'm doing that, it doesn't allow like the camera to be on because the camera's already working to try to scan the document or the file that's already there. So I ran into a bunch of problems this year where like um I had to use the reader and it would require me to turn off my camera, which understandably is a problem because like people want to make sure you're not using other outside things. um that was a problem. And also, since it was a reader, like on some of the times where they wanted the audio on too, like I couldn't keep my audio on unless everybody in the class wanted to hear my computer
Yeah.
reader.
Hmm. Those are, I think, really great examples of sort of where these things start to come into conflict with each other. What I'm hoping you'll do, Josh, we're gonna kind of move here in a moment to a demo of a screen reader. So if you can stick around after we've demoed that and kind of talk a little bit about how sort of true that is to your experience or anything else that brings into mind. And then certainly we will have more than enough time. We may get some additional questions from the group that's here with us today. All right, I'm going to move back real quickly here to sharing my screen. While we're kind of spending some time on this issue of technology and sort of what some of the challenges are around that, this was a great study. Rebecca shared this with me that really was trying to sort of kind of categorize some of these recent technology needs and really understand what where some of the opportunities are for improvement. And one thing that I was struck by is that when we hear things like technology needs, I know a lot of people probably start to get nervous that it's going to be really complicated and tricky. But actually, the number one comment really echoes what Josh just said, which was about sort of organization of our documents and the materials that we're sharing, as well as things like due dates and things like that. I think this was really interesting when we talk about using learning management systems like Blackboard or Canvas, if you use that, or Google Classroom, whatever the case may be, is just the overall importance of making sure things are clearly labeled, that they are organized in a consistent fashion, and that there's access to things like class notes and the slides, so that students can have those available while we're in this kind of environment. Obviously, there are specific requests regarding actual technology, whether that's things like having captions or alternative formats to documents, or again, this idea of formatting something with assistive technology in mind. And so that's what's going to bring us to our demo. And I have a short video that I'm going to share with everybody. And I'm very, very hopeful that you will be able to, I want to make sure I've got my volume all turned up so that we can all share this. And if for some reason it is not working effectively, I will share the link and everybody can then watch that on their own. So, but again, in the spirit of talking about technology challenges, right? All right, here we're going to go. So what's happening here is you're going to see there is the narrator who is describing these two documents. One, and they're basically conveying the same information for a course. One is accessible. The other one is basically the same document, but not accessible. And he's going to kind of go in and out of using the JAWS screen reader. And you can kind of see how that experience differs between those two documents. So I'm going to start it, but somebody please raise your hands or jump up and down if you can't hear it for some reason, or if it's not otherwise useful.
In this video, I will be demonstrating what a screen reader user experiences when using Microsoft Word. I will be working with two documents, one accessible and one that is not accessible.
JAWS for Windows is ready.
The first major feature of an accessible Word document is heading structure. With the accessible Word document, I will be able to use shortcut keys, such as the Insert plus F6 key and the H key, to navigate directly to the heading that I want. Let's take a look at this.
Heading list dialog. Headings list view. Links for more information, ::2, 9 of 9. To move to items, use the arrow keys. Will John Dunn SCOTUS: 3. Move to heading button to activate. Print view. The document has 4 objects.
Now I will use the H key and I'll be able to move from one heading to the next.
Quick keys on. Heading 3, William of Ockham. Heading 2, list of major medieval philosophers. Page 4. Heading 2, review of medieval period. Heading 2, links for more information:
In the inaccessible document, on the other hand, I have to use the down, up and down arrow keys to navigate to a certain part of the text. Also, I do not hear any information that indicates that I have arrived at a major heading.
JAWS, Alt-Tab, Philosophy 101-Copy -Microsoft Word. Quick keys on. There are no headings in this document. No more headings found.
The second important feature in an accessible document is the alternative text for images. With the accessible document, once I arrive at an image, I will immediately hear a description of that image.
Alt-Tab, set Alt-Tab, Philosophy 101- Page 4, Philosophy 1. Quick keys on. Wrapping to top, page 1, picture painting of Bonaventure praying. Page 2, picture painting of Thomas Aquinas. Picture photo of Duns Scotus. Page 3, picture William of Ockham.
With the inaccessible document, however, I will only hear picture.
Philosophy 101 - Microsoft Word. Philosophy. Quick keys on. Page 2, picture. Picture. Page 3, picture.
Finally, another important aspect of an accessible document is a clear description for links. With the accessible document, I know what type of information will be found at the website connected to the link.
Philosophy 101 - Microsoft Word. Quick keys on. Page 4. Link. Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Left parent. Stanford University. Right parent. Wikipedia page on medieval philosophy. Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Left parent. Routledge Press. Right parent.
With the inaccessible document, on the other hand, the information at the website is not so clear.
Philosophy 101 - copy - Microsoft Word. Page 3. Quick keys on. Page 4. http://plato.stanford.edu/ http://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/medieval_philosophy http://www.rep.routledge.com/article/b078.
I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. Please contact me at jpolozotto@taftcollege.edu or give me a call at 661-763-7977. Thank you.
All right. So I think there are clearly a few different pieces there that stand out to me. Basically being told that you can't navigate through a document at all because there's no headings, that really leaves you in a position of you have to use that screen reader to go through the entire document to try and find the information that you need. Similarly, I think that those links, I know that that's what I always used to do, just kind of pop in different links that I was sharing with students to take them to the World Health Organization or something with the government. And this idea that somebody would look at that and the screen reader would read every single letter that was in that HTTPS, but yet still not necessarily know where they were going, I think was really impactful to me. So those are a couple of examples: the structured content, the images, and the descriptive links that are on campus here are core principles around trying to build skills and expertise in accessibility, and something that we are focusing on throughout our 10-day challenge. So I do want to encourage everybody, if you are not participating in the challenge, or if you just want some additional resources on how to learn more about kind of making your document look more like the first one instead of the second one in that video that we just watched, this is the best place to go for that. There's all kinds of written tutorials and videos about all of those pieces. Or you have the opportunity to sit in on more of our breakout sessions. So coming up today, we have one more session at 1 o'clock, which is going into greater detail on structured content using tables and lists. And then tomorrow, we're going to be talking about those hyperlinks and how to do that in all different types of software. And then what I will also remind everybody is that we have daily drop-in sessions at 2 o'clock. These are manned by accessibility fellows as well as members of the work group. You can bring in stuff that you're working on, and we are happy to help or just answer questions about any of the sessions. So with that, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to see what other questions or things that you have either for me or for Josh. We are happy. We've got more than enough time to tackle any of those today. So does anybody want to get it started? Any questions for either one of us?
I just have I would start with more of a comment. I would note that at the beginning you talked about, official accommodations versus accommodations that might help that aren't necessarily in the official record that we get. And I would encourage any faculty that have questions about it that Patrick and Star are very knowledgeable about it. And if you just call over there or email them about an issue, and they can talk you through, maybe what is an obligation, but what would really help if you would be willing to do it. I've had a lot of those conversations, and they can help clarify what you should be doing.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Thanks so much, Liz. Let me go to Lynn.
Yeah, I just, having a son with disabilities has instructed me a lot about how to navigate these issues with students. And one thing we've encouraged him to do is to actually talk with his faculty members individually before classes begin, and have a conversation with them about what his issues are, what accommodations he needs. And while that's not required, I think for him, it makes him feel heard. He's able to address certain issues with faculty who may not necessarily know what kinds of accommodations he needs or how best they can be met in the classroom. And I think it also empowers him as an individual to speak with faculty. And I think it's a great idea, but it's certainly not required. We are not required to ask students to come to us and talk about their disabilities with us. On the other hand, what I've noticed as I've also worked with my own son and worked with other students who have disabilities is that oftentimes an accommodation that helps one student may actually help other students in the class who may not necessarily have a documented disability, but have challenges. And so it's not necessarily, you know, we often think about this individual student and that individual student, but anything we can do to make the class more accessible to everyone, and to make it a class that accommodates everyone, whether you have a disability or not, I think is really important to understand. Because I've had students say, I'm really glad you did this because that, even though I don't have this issue, I don't have that concern, it just made the process of learning much easier for me. So.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. That's a great point. And definitely in the spirit of everything we've been trying to focus on this week about why being proactive is so important. Josh, there's a question in the chat box that, and then I'll come to you, Julie, but the question in the chat box specifically relates to what we just watched. And we're asking, do you find the robotic voice distracting that was on JAWS or difficult to listen to? Or are there more natural sounding options? Can you change up the voice? What are the other possibilities there?
Yeah, so thankfully, like even trying to listen to that, like when we were doing the video, I was like, what's going on? Like the voice was kind of getting me. Thankfully, like the ones in the accessibility center and then the one on my laptop are more natural sounding. But I think watching the video did bring up a good point. Like if you heard every time there was a little like semicolon or a dash, like it would continuously say that. So that's kind of what I was talking about, like on those questions where it's like dash 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 dash, it will sit there and like if there's too many it will just like blow its mind and like not know what to do with itself. So that's kind of what I was alluding to beforehand.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Julie, what do you got?
Oh, I was basically going to echo what Josh was saying. My daughter is legally blind and she uses a reader, and she started with JAWS and she stopped using it because it was so incredibly annoying. But the Mac accessibility, the voices, you can change the voices and the tones, and it's a lot more user friendly. So yeah, that's all I was going to say.
Great. Other questions or comments for that matter? Yeah, Todd, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn, for your comments. And I'm sort of curious. I've dealt with a number of students over the course of my teaching career, and my heart goes out to them because I know that on some level the testing that they have to do through disability services in order to be qualified for accommodations can be expensive. It has to be renewed every semester. Some students they start with the best of intentions in any given class thinking, well, I'm not going to claim my disability because I don't want to go through the process, or I think I can get through it in this class. And then they find themselves in trouble, part of the way through the semester, and then they want to claim disability. And that's hard for us because we're not, from what I've gathered from STAR, unless they officially, put that out there, we don't have to accommodate them. And that sounds terrible. I would always try to accommodate them, but at the same time, it's I'm curious as to your experience with that, Josh, and how that makes those parameters make you feel as a student.
Yeah, definitely. I think the best example I could give is I have a a younger sister who's in high school right now, who has like autism and things, and like a few other things on top of that. She for the long like high functioning autism. She for the longest time didn't want to like say anything or do anything, like the fear of like other people in the classes like thinking a certain way of her or feeling like a certain way, or like, oh, this person has something like that's not 100% like to the norm with them, until high school. Like she totally just didn't want to have any of the accommodations like that. And then when things started getting harder and harder, like eventually it had to say something, because like there's only a certain point like that you can go if you're not getting accommodations that you need. And I feel like that's a kind of hopefully not the same thing, and hopefully not what college students feel, but I feel like that could definitely be a role in it. They don't want to be like singled out, like if they're going to take a test in a different location or something like that. I think different things like that could discourage people from wanting to come and talk about those things or disclose them to faculty.
Yeah, great point. Kristen.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you a lot for this, because I'm a student coordinator. So even though a student might not reveal in their job, we don't ask that. Like, we would never know if they didn't tell us that they needed some accommodations. And I'm thinking about our training manuals and things like that. So I very much appreciate all this information. It's something I didn't think about before. So thank you. That was it.
Yeah. Well, Kristen, thanks for being here. I think that's one of the things I'm most excited about the accessibility challenge, is that we have people in different roles like yours that that we know maybe haven't had the opportunity to be exposed to this information in the past. So I give you kudos for coming today and listening and participating in all this information and just starting to think about it. So.
Thanks.
Other.
Liz has her hand up.
Oh, go ahead. Yep.
Oh, I think someone mentioned, I think it was Todd that mentioned issues where halfway through someone realizes they needed accommodations. Again, they're not really retroactive. And so I know when I taught, when I teach a face-to-face large class like I do in the spring, I make it a point to tell people who have accommodations for extra time in a distraction-free environment, they need to take it, because taking an exam in a room of 200 students will never be a distraction-free environment. It's not even close, right? So where in a class of 30 or 40, they're not really sure if they really need it. I actually assert on day one, I said, if you have this accommodation, this is the exact situation where it's really going to help you. And so let's get this done. So I kind of just in general call that out and encourage them to not take a wait and see approach. Kind of based on my experiences and that specific style of class.
I think there are also some ways that we can, there are some creative things that we can do as faculty to help support discretion around that. For example, if you are in a class that's a longer class and you are giving a quiz or something like that, you may want to do that right at the beginning of class so the student can go directly to the location to do that, as opposed to wait till the end of class and the student has to excuse themselves partway through. Just small things like that, I think, can make a big difference in trying to not sort of obviously call out the situation. Jean, go ahead.
In the School of Ed and the upper division courses, we often have very small sections right before they go to student teach. So that's a luxury for everyone, students and faculty. But I've had students before that say, well, I have this letter from Disability Services, but I think I can do it in the classroom. And so I've said to them, they say, I think I want to take the test or the quiz here. And I'll say, well, let's try it once. And if it doesn't work, you can have a retake, or, just try out the environment. And so, but then if they decide that they want to go take those assessments in a distraction-free environment, then once they switch to do that, then that's the way we do it going forward. But we communicated, and I was able to check in with them. So I always assumed that was all right. They came up and said, I have this, but I don't want to have to go over there because I think. So did I handle that correctly? You're just,
I mean, ultimately it is up to the student. I mean, you can't force
Yeah.
a student to take
Yeah.
advantage of their accommodations.
okay.
I think that the key is that open communication and letting the student know that you are supportive and willing to try and work with them. I think that you don't have to offer that sort of option of retaking. That, you know, I think that, you know, the idea of not sort of retroactively redoing something, as opposed to letting a student know that you can, that you'd prefer that they make a decision and take their exam or whatever the case may be, as opposed to take the midterm and then, okay, now I want to retake it.
Yeah, this was usually more like a smaller quiz or something. I mean, like the first one, and I usually give them some kind of short quiz before we do any longer quiz, so that everybody's used to how I'm going to do it. That's what you learn in assessment practices, is to make it's even the process and the formatting of how you're going to do things. So I give them a little taste of it, which is very low risk, almost, you know, just very minimal risk. And it lowers the anxiety, and then they get the bigger quiz or the bigger test later on, but sort of a scaffolding in that way. But and then I also wanted to say to the group that I have a permanent disability in my foot, but when I hurt my foot, at first it was an injury, and it was confusing when you know, as to what accommodations were available. But if you just have an injury, you don't get accommodations in terms of the physical realm, but you're just very happy those handicap buttons are there, or if you end up on crutches or something like that, and the door openers and ramps are all of a sudden, oh, I'm so glad it's here because I was injured. But then when it becomes a permanent disability, that's when you get accommodations, just physically, because some people think, I had another faculty member broke her leg, her foot, and then she said, well, where's all my accommodations? But ADA accommodations are for permanent disabilities, not temporary situations. But then, like you're saying here, it's very nice though when you have the handicap button, or you have the option of the screen reader, because things come up in your life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You never know what situations you're going to find yourself in.
Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Anybody have any final thoughts or comments before we?
Michelle, actually, something that I want to discuss is about my experience. So I had a student with visual impairments in my class. Of course, it was never told to me in the letter. And he gave me an accommodation letter. The accommodation letter was for the time as well as for use of laptops. And I guess there was one more thing which I don't remember exactly now. But the student wanted me to give him all the handouts in large print. As a faculty, if something is not in the accommodation letter, you know I don't have to provide one, or I can ask, can you get me another accommodation letter? What would you recommend, or others would recommend, in such cases where the student has other needs, 2 or 3 more needs other than just what is provided in the accommodation letter, and I cannot ask anything about the degree of impairment or anything else?
Yeah, great question. So I have a few thoughts about this, but then certainly Rebecca or anybody else that's worked with. Yeah, so Rebecca's suggestion is things like there's certain things that we can do that are relatively easy, straightforward, that can address a number of those kinds of additional requests, either stated or unstated. Meeting those needs. So Rebecca made the comment about if you make a handout available in digital format, then the student has the opportunity to enlarge the font and print it out in that large font size, or read it by zooming in on their e-reader or screen. There's also, we talked yesterday in one of our sessions about alternative formats that are just automatically available to students in Blackboard. And so I encourage you to take a look at that. Those are things that I think are like really sort of low investment, easy opportunities to point students in the direction of sort of those additional things that might not be explicitly stated on an accommodations letter. If it's something that feels sort of like beyond the normal realm of what you can do or accommodate, or you're just uncertain about why you're getting that request, I think that's the question then to bring in Star and Patrick's office at that point, to try and understand Maybe that's something that can be provided by their office. Maybe that's something that is a normal request and you're just not clear about how it's being applied, or you just want to do that double checking about whether it's appropriate or not. Anybody else have any additional thoughts about that piece of it?
Yeah, and I did contact Char on this at that time. Like, for example, the student didn't want to attend, I teach research methods, and he didn't want to attend any of the SPSS labs, saying because he cannot look at the screen, or the whiteboard. There is nothing that he can do in class. And I was like, at least you're taking notes, at least you are listening to what I'm saying, that will help you in some way or the form or the other. But that student kind of like didn't want to attend those labs at all. And that was a little bit of a discussion we had with Char and him.
Yeah, I feel like that sounds like an exception to the broad rule.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I definitely think that on those one-off situations with students, that needs to be handled individually. So.
Yeah.
All right, folks, it is 10 till, and we are set to stop right now, but I really encourage everybody, if you have more questions, you want to talk through this more, you have individual circumstances, come by at our 2 o'clock drop-in session today. I'll be there along with a few other people. Thank you so much to our student, Josh, for joining us today. We really, we could not kind of have as robust of a discussion without your perspective, and your voice in this space is so important to us. So we really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today.
Yes, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.